Hi, my name's Cathy Millett, and this week we're adding a broken floor to our interior. There's loads of pictures of demolished buildings around, and you can easily see how buildings were made. What's important is to find a photo that inspires you that's got the same building style. So a lot of these photos are of buildings that are concrete, where the building that I'm doing now, a Kino diorama, is actually brick. So just need to make sure it looks right, because this was built before the age of reinforced concrete. So next up is making the floor that's going to be all broken down. I'm going to presume the top one's completely gone, but the bottom one is going to be half hanging off and half down. I think it's going to be a really nice effect. To do that, I'm going to use joists. These are, I looked in, they're 8x16 HO scale wood, so they're 2x5 basically. And then coffee stirrers, which I'll be able to smash and break really easily. So the aim of the floor is to have a sandwich of 2 layers of coffee stirrers with the joists in between. So the first thing I needed to do was cut some joists of some random lengths, not sticking out beyond that bit of side wall. So I measured them up and I put them at 15mm intervals. And I used a pair of pliers to break them because it gives a much nicer finish. And at one end I used a knife, but at the other end I used a set of pliers. Top tip, do use a northwest short line chopper. They're brilliant for chopping wood. Unfortunately, I tidied mine away at Christmas and I can't find it. It's somewhere incredibly safe, but when I find it, it'll be out on my worktop again. In the meanwhile, I broke them with a pair of pliers, and I broke all of my coffee stirrers with a pair of pliers as well, because I wanted a nice broken end. And I might trim the end up that goes against the wall eventually, but for now, I want it to look incredibly like it's been broken and demolished and exploded, rather than it was cut neatly with a knife. Once I had everything chopped up and cut to length, I assembled it, and I just used Tacky Glue, which is a thicker white glue, and I made sure that I masking taped the ends to keep them flat. These cocktail stirrers, coffee stirrers, are a little bit bouncy, and I find they will bounce off. And I just broke one end slightly with a pair of pliers so that there'd be a bend in my floor going down. Unfortunately, after I glued it all and I sat there looking at it, I realised I'd bent it the wrong way, or I'd glued my bits on the wrong way. So I'll bend it back again tomorrow. But the masking tape just helps control everything. So I've stuck the middle joist down, and the end joists will come on later, and I'll take the masking tape off and I'll get everything aligned. But what I'll probably do first is glue the end ones on while there's still weight. You can just use a brick to weigh it. I used metal weights, bricks, whatever it is. Just make sure there's something nice and steady on it so that when it glues nice and flat. Okay, time to remove all the bricks. 1 or 2 of these moved. Well, it's a broken down building, but something to watch out for when you're doing this. Moving stones, wood when you put this down is a bit of a nightmare problem. Ooh. Now at this point I tried bending my bent bits of wood back the other way, and they snapped and fell off. So no problem, I decided to do those as a separate piece that I would glue on separately. I'm still not entirely convinced this is how it would break in real life, so we'll see. Now, the next section really is a lot of trying to create this box and use broken bits of wood. So there's a lot more gluing of wood and then breaking and gluing on of individual bits of coffee stirrer to reflect the broken joists and floorboards. So just bear with it. It takes a while, but it's worth it in the end, because you get that structure underneath, which when it's all pulled apart and fallen down, looks more realistic. This is your opportunity to get those ends of the boards, the floorboards, looking really battered and twisted. So when I broke them, I didn't just do a nice clean straight cut, which I'd done previously with the pliers. I twisted them when I broke them, and I got a really nice long jagged twisted cut, and that just looks more exciting and more realistic. If you're wondering why all my coffee stirrers are odd covers, it's no reason other than I thought, why use new ones? I've got loads of test pieces that I've used over the years with various different paints and treatments on, so I just thought I'd use them up, and it was an easy, cheap way of finding loads of spare scrap wood. Now, you noticed I had a big box of coffee stirrers. I did used to go in and acquire them from various little coffee shops, 1 or 2 at a time as I went. But then my mum bought me a box of 1,000 for Christmas, and then she bought me 2 spare boxes for my birthday. So I have 3,000-4,000 coffee stirrers at home. So I'm not too short whenever it comes to pieces of wood. Now, they don't work as well in HO because they're a little chunky, but in the larger scales, such as O and 1 to 35, they're really, really good. And certainly I use them a lot when scratch building because they're free or very, very cheap. So I've got piles of wood and everything now, just broken bits on the side here, and I've got my wooden, here's a few more just broken bits around, and what I'm going to do is just snap them a little bit so that you know, you can use them as broken bits of wood around. They're a bit long, some of them, just tear them, and I can use them as scrap wood. And although there's some scrap wood in the kit, because I'm doing this coming in, I want there to just be a little bit more sort of variety of wood. And broken wood is a really big thing in, you know, all these floors have come down, and where it looks a bit manky and I'm not totally sure I've done it right, well, you know, I might just dump a few bits of wood on top and then it will just hide any mistakes on the gaps. Really good. There we go. So just a pile of broken wood ready to go, and that will get spray painted and all sorts of things as well. Right, now I need to paint all this wood up. Now, I could have used the colour, but I'd used loads of disparate bits. And, you know, if I thought about it, I probably would have painted them, ripped them, so I had the ends already done. But I can recreate that with paints, it's not really a problem. So what I'm going to do is start off with 2 sets I have of paint, just because they're nice colours. AK Interactive Old and Weathered Wood, and I'm going to be using the Volume 1, which is a lot more interior colours. These weren't exterior wood, so they don't want to be too grey. And I keep them in here and use them a lot for this type of project. So I'm going to be using varnished wood for the surfaces. For the ceiling and the roof, they're the same thing, aren't they? For the ceiling and the floor, I'm going to use 2 different colours. What was the original floor of the floor above is going to be in varnished wood, is what I'm trying to say. There we go. So these have just had a primer coat of Halfords Grey Primer. I went on to paint the underneaths, as in the ceilings, with a white, partly because I'm going to put plaster on in a minute that will have fallen off, and I thought white was as good a colour as any. I just used a plain Tamiya flat white. Once I'd done that, I went on and painted all the middle bits in a dark brown from the AK weathering set again, and that one was the weathered wood, AK 783. Finally, I used freshly cut timber from the AK range, AK 778, to just catch all the ends, the chip bits of wood, all of those lovely broken twisted bits, to make sure that they looked real. And the very final thing I did was put a wash over, just an enamel wash, a darkish one, just to bring out the grain on the varnished wood side, just because it was looking a bit bland. So I'm halfway through painting my wood and I thought to myself, really I should do the plaster for the ceiling. The ceiling wouldn't be wood, it'd be plastered. And I was going to do a really ornate plaster, but I went to Hobbycraft and I had a look and I couldn't find anything I could use. And it seemed like a lot of hassle for a broken down building. If I was doing this and I wanted it to be real, I probably would find a beautifully ornate building. But as it's going to be cracked plaster, I'm just going to use some polyfiller and make some plaster, which I can break up and put around the place, a really thin skim layer. So to make that, I've got some polyfiller still. Now this is my polyfiller. This will not shrink or crack, but hey, it'll be fine. So here we go. I'm going to make it a bit thicker than I did for the other building because I want it to flake, whereas the other one powdered a bit more. I don't necessarily need a lot. You probably can't see it, but I've got a sheet of acetate here, which is just something flat and smooth to put it on. I can peel it off in a bit. So there we go, it's this consistency. And I'm just going to put it out. And actually, it needs a bit more mixing there, doesn't it? That's fine. So I just want a nice, smooth surface. And the proper surface is obviously going to be on the flat side, but this one wants to be as smooth as possible, not too thick. I'm just going to leave that to dry on the side, somewhere nice and flat. I'm going to put it there before it sets up. So we're continuing on with the plaster, and here's the plaster that I made. Oops, it's very easy to break. What I need is just a couple of square edge bits. Actually, to fit into this would be good. So what I'm going to do is just take this and score probably about there, round it, just to see if I can. Oops, there we go. Ooh, and it's all cracking. There we go. It needs to be a bit shorter than that, but there we go. So just there we go. So that's lost a little bit in its corner, but I think we can cope with that. So I can put this on here as a bit of broken plaster ceiling, and then just crack that bit off. There we go. So I can glue that on. I repeated that with my other piece of floor, and then just broke up some of the rest of the bits to look like they'd fallen off, because actually most of the plaster's going to have come off the ceiling. And then I thought it looked a bit boring and flat because it was white. So I got out some yellow, just Tamiya yellow, and some Tamiya white, and I mixed up a really pale lemon colour, which was one yellow to a couple of white, just to get it to a little bit more interest. And one side only got painted. I painted all the spare bits, which isn't as easy as it sounds, and left them to dry. Be warned, they get quite flexible and they're very bendy when they're wet. Excellent. Right, so that's some plaster ready to go into the mix. Now it's just time to put it all together. Now, I did take this bit, which is going in the corner here, and I had sanded it just a little bit to get it to match, which was a lot of fiddling. But it should now just fit into here correctly. Oops. Oh well, that bit actually fell off for real. We'll just leave it there. Now, to make sure this all sticks and works well, I'm going to just glue this one piece in now. Go away, leave it for a second or two to glue up, and I'll be fine. And I'm mostly gluing on the bottom bit here for no other reason than if the glue shows, it won't really matter because it'll be underneath. So I'll do a little bead on the top, but I really don't want too much there because I don't want it showing. You know, oops, yay. I'm not going to do anything else now. I'm just going to leave this until it sets, because otherwise it'll just fall back off again, and I want it to be really solid so everything's lean against it. So this has had plenty of time to set up, and we're just putting the final pieces in place. So it's just a case of arranging them so they look good. I'm just going to... I'm debating, as you can see, how to actually glue them in, which is quite hard. Because there's not a lot of gluing surfaces. And this is just a matter of getting everything fitted together and glued. Now, some people will put spots of glue on everything as they go. I tend to place things, get them how I want them, and then put the glue on afterwards. It's a matter of taste. You're less likely to get glue showing, but I know I'm going to put loads of dust over the top, so if there's the odd glue spot, I'm not that bothered. So what I did do was put the main floors in place and glue them down. It's not actually that easy because there's not many spots that are actually touching, but I put the two floors down with glue underneath, and then I put in underneath all of the debris and the plaster and some of the wood that I'd painted, and a bit more plaster and a bit more wood till I built it up so it looked reasonable. Then I got out two dilute mixes, one of IPA, which is isopropyl alcohol and water, about a third isopropyl alcohol, 2/3 water, and the same for white glue, about a third white glue, 2/3 water in another container. And I put the isopropyl alcohol on because it makes the glue run better. And then I put the glue on and it will run through the whole of the pile. But it is important, you don't want any drips or solid bits of glue. So I do go away and look for any excess where it's welled up or built up, and I take that off. And then I'm just using a bit of kitchen towel and I mop it off and any drips that are going to sit there. And to make sure it doesn't drip on the and stick the diorama to the cardboard, I put it up in 4 bits of Tamiya pots because they're nice and flat. They're really useful pots. I put it up in that, and then when it drips, it runs down and drips to the ground without actually sticking to anything. And I will mop that up as time goes by. So that's just it. We're just placing things artistically so they look like the roof's fallen in and there's loads and loads of debris. Whew, on to the final stages. So I'm just going to take this off here, and this all dried up overnight. I like to give them plenty of time to dry up because there's nothing worse than trying to spread powder onto a wet surface. Though having said that, it's going to be very hard to get it to stick on here. So I probably will wet this surface anyway, just to get a little bit of stickiness for when I put the powder on. So first things first, what do you want to do? Well, we need to mix up a powder that looks a bit like rubble dust. And I'm going to use 2 colours. One is white, plenty of white pigments out there. And I'm just going to put it in with a bit of a shake actually. And then the other colour I've been wondering about for a while. And eventually I went and bought some terracotta tile grout, which mine's actually a mosaic one. It's quite a small packet, and I thought tile grout is actually just what I want because it's the right colour, and it's also you know, quite fine. This is mosaic tile grout, so it's not got a lot of sanding, made for finer things. So I'm just going to put a little bit of that in as well. There we go, and it gives me that kind of more building-y colour that you get. It's a lovely colour actually, this. I do love it. I might be using it on other things, and certainly all of this will feature much more heavily next time when we're looking at how to do brick debris. So just a good mix up to give it a nice, not totally homogenised, but to get rid of the lumps, because I find I'm using up my MIG pigments. They're out of production, but everybody does a white pigment, AK Interactive, Ammo by MIG, and I just find they have quite a lot of lumps in them. So I want this to be a powder. Mix it in and then I want to brush it on. Now, as you can imagine, it's going to be quite hard. I actually want it all up of these. I've been saying for ages I want to get rid of this. I used a mix of brushing on. Actually went and got a bigger brush because this wasn't quite big enough, this small one. So I brushed things on, I squished them around, and I also just tapped the brush to drop powder down in realistic manners. I made sure I got plenty underneath where it would have piled down into all the gaps, anywhere I can think where the powder would have piled. I added a couple of bricks, and I'm going to talk about those next week, so I won't really mention them now, but right at the top where the 2 walls meet, there's this really weird section where the coloured plaster seems to go behind the wall, which is just wrong. So I just put the bricks in there to hide it. It is useful sometimes to think about these things before you paint everything up and put them together, and it'd been bugging me for a while, so I'd always said to myself, I'll put a few bricks in there, so I did, and then I put some powder on top just to make sure they tied in well. So what am I going to use to fix it? Well, I found over the years that these aren't particularly handled, so all you really need is just a slight coat of, you could use a matte varnish, but I find it disappears it. I'm just going to use isopropyl alcohol and water, about 1/3 isopropyl alcohol to water mix. And I've got a very fine bottle, and I'm just going to squirt it on. Which will give it some very realistic amounts of dampness. It will puddle it like it would have puddled, which is good. And I'm just going to leave that to set and see what it looks like when it's set. And as before, just to stop it sticking to anything, I'm going to put those 4 pots of Tamiya underneath, which are really useful pots. There we go. Excellent. Just leave that to set. It's a lot of that in dioramas, just leaving things to set. and wait and dry. You can't rush these stages, or you try and do too much and it just looks a bit meh. So here we go. And actually I noticed that my floor here, when it got wet yesterday, buckled in a really realistic way, which I hadn't thought of, so I'm very excited by that. A little bit of buckled floor. Who would have thought? Well, here we go, the final interior in place. It's still got a little bits of damp at the bottom to dry out, but I'm pleased how it's come out. Worth saying, if you rub this, it will come off powdery in your hands. This is not something you're going to handle. If you want it to be really robust, put a varnish over it or something, but I just find it fades these effects on here so much that you end up putting more and more on, so I prefer just to leave it like this. It is a diorama, it's not for handling. And next week we're going to do more debris, but the brick debris on the outside, a couple of different ways of doing that. So I'm just going to turn this round and you can see the way it looks. Oops. On the inside as well, you can see the view through the doorway into all of that rubble and basically other rubbish and stuff that's come down. So very happy with it, and all I need to do now is take the final photos.